the diplomatic marriage. James Rivera had seen enough blood to last several lifetimes. 3 years as a combat medic during the Human-Zalari War had taught him that bodies broke in remarkably similar ways regardless of whether they had 2 legs or 4, red blood or blue. He'd patched up soldiers under enemy fire, performed field surgeries in collapsed bunkers, and held the hands of dying men and women who just wanted someone familiar nearby when the end came. The war had finally ended 6 months ago with a treaty that surprised everyone. Neither side won. Both sides simply ran out of the will to keep fighting. Now James sat in a clean, climate-controlled office on Gateway Station, the massive orbital platform that served as neutral ground between human and Zalari space. Across the desk sat Administrator Chin, a thin woman with tired eyes who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "The interspecies integration program needs volunteers," she said, sliding a data tablet across the desk. "Specifically for the Cultural Unity Initiative." James picked up the tablet, scrolling through dense legal text that made his head hurt. What exactly is this initiative? Arranged marriages between humans and Zalari citizens, Chin said bluntly. Symbolic partnerships to demonstrate that our species can coexist peacefully. You'd be matched with a Zalari partner, go through a formal bonding ceremony, and live together for a minimum of 2 years while serving as ambassadors for interspecies cooperation. James blinked. "You want me to marry an alien?" "We want you to participate in a diplomatic arrangement that happens to use marriage as its legal framework," Chin corrected. "It's not about romance. It's about showing both our peoples that peace is possible. That we can build lives together instead of just shooting at each other." James leaned back in his chair, processing this bizarre proposal. After 3 years of war, he'd expected to return to Earth, find some quiet job in a hospital, and try to forget the things he'd seen. But Earth felt foreign now. He'd been gone too long. The cities moved too fast, people worried about things that seemed trivial, and nobody understood what it meant to wake up every morning wondering if this was the day a missile found your medical tent. "What do I get out of this?" he asked. "Housing on Gateway Station or one of the integration colonies. Diplomatic stipend that's generous enough to live comfortably. Full medical coverage. And the satisfaction of knowing you're helping prevent another war." Chen's expression softened slightly. "Look, Rivera, I've read your file. Distinguished service, 3 commendations for bravery, you saved dozens of lives under impossible conditions. You're exactly the kind of person we need for this program. Someone who's proven they can see past species differences when it matters." James thought about his alternatives. Return to Earth and struggle to readjust. Re-enlist and risk getting deployed to some new conflict. Or this, a strange diplomatic marriage that at least served a purpose beyond just keeping him busy. "I'll do it," he said. The matching process took 2 weeks. James filled out extensive questionnaires about his preferences, values, and expectations. He sat through psychological evaluations and cultural sensitivity training. He learned basic Zalari etiquette and communication protocols. The whole thing felt surreal, like preparing for a mission where the objective was his own personal life. When they finally told him he'd been matched with someone, he felt nothing except mild curiosity. Her name was Lyra Solen. The file described her as a junior diplomatic attaché from the Zalari Foreign Service, age 28 in human years, interested in xenobiology and comparative literature. The photograph showed a woman with the characteristic features of her species. Smooth silver blue skin, large dark eyes with vertical pupils, elegant bone structure that seemed almost sculptural. She looked serious in the photo, professional, like she was approaching this arrangement with the same practical mindset he was. They met for the first time in a neutral conference room designed to accommodate both species comfortably. James arrived early, nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first combat deployment. This was different from facing enemy fire. At least in combat he knew what he was supposed to do. Lyra entered precisely on time, moving with fluid grace that made her seem to glide rather than walk. She wore simple robes in deep blue, and her expression was carefully neutral. "James Rivera," she said, her voice carrying a melodic quality that the translator couldn't quite capture. "I'm pleased to meet you." "Likewise," James said, standing and offering the formal greeting gesture he'd been taught, right hand over heart, slight bow. "Thank you for volunteering for this program." "We both volunteered," Lyra said, a hint of amusement in her tone. "That makes us equally brave or equally foolish." They sat across from each other while a mediator explained the formal arrangements. They would live in a residential unit in Gateway Station's diplomatic quarter. Both would maintain their own careers and personal space. The marriage bond was legally recognized by both governments but carried no requirement for romantic involvement. They were expected to present as a unified partnership in public settings and attend various diplomatic functions together. "Do you have any questions for each other?" the mediator asked. James looked at Lyra, trying to read her alien features. "Why did you volunteer for this?" "I believe peace requires more than treaties and trade agreements," she said. "It requires genuine connection between our peoples. Someone needs to demonstrate that such connections are possible." She tilted her head slightly. "Why did you volunteer?" "Because 3 years of war taught me that we're not as different as we think," James said. "And because going back to my old life felt impossible." Something shifted in Lyra's expression, a softening that suggested approval or perhaps recognition. "Then perhaps we are well matched after all." The bonding ceremony took place 3 days later in a formal chamber designed to honor both human and Zalari traditions. James wore his military dress uniform because he owned nothing else formal enough. Lyra wore elaborate ceremonial robes that marked her as someone of significance in Zalari culture, though the briefing materials had described her as low-ranking. They exchanged vows in both languages, promising partnership and mutual respect. James repeated words he barely understood while Zalari officials he'd never met observed with serious expressions. When it was done, they were legally married by both human and Zalari law. The reception was small and awkward. Officials from both governments congratulated them with varying degrees of sincerity. James shook hands and accepted well wishes while feeling like he was watching someone else's life unfold. Lyra handled it all with perfect diplomatic grace, saying the right things to the right people, never seeming uncertain or uncomfortable. When they finally reached their assigned residence, James felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. The apartment was spacious and thoughtfully designed, blending human and Zalari aesthetics. Separate bedrooms, a shared common area, a kitchen that could accommodate both species' dietary needs. Everything arranged for professional cohabitation rather than intimate partnership. "This is strange," James said, standing in the middle of the living space. "Very strange," Lyra agreed. "I suggest we establish some ground rules to make it less so." They spent the evening discussing practical arrangements. Schedules, shared spaces, privacy boundaries. It felt more like negotiating a roommate agreement than starting a marriage. But it was clear and manageable, which James appreciated. Over the following weeks, they settled into an unexpected rhythm. James worked at Gateway Station's medical center, treating both human and Zalari patients. Lyra had diplomatic duties that kept her occupied during standard work cycles, though she never discussed the specifics. They shared breakfast most mornings, making pleasant conversation about neutral topics. They attended 2 formal functions together, presenting as a unified partnership for public consumption. It was professional and distant, exactly what James expected. Except Lyra kept surprising him in small ways. She knew things a junior diplomatic attaché shouldn't know. When James mentioned a complex medical case involving Zalari physiology, she offered insights that suggested advanced xenobiological training. When news broke about political tensions in a distant sector, she analyzed the situation with strategic depth that seemed beyond her supposed rank. "You're very well informed," James commented one evening over dinner. "I read extensively," Lyra said, not quite meeting his eyes. James noticed other things too. The way station security always seemed more alert when Lyra moved through public areas. The deference other Zalari showed her, subtle but unmistakable. The fact that their apartment, while presented as standard diplomatic housing, had security features far beyond what junior officials typically received. "Lyra," he said one morning, "what exactly do you do in the diplomatic service?" "I facilitate communication between species," she said. "Cultural liaison work, mostly." It was a non-answer and they both knew it. The truth began emerging during their second month together. James came home early one afternoon to find Lyra in the common area, speaking rapidly in Zalari to someone on a secure communication channel. She didn't notice him at first, and her tone carried absolute authority, giving orders that whoever was on the other end clearly didn't question. She ended the call and turned, finding James watching from the doorway. "That sounded important," he said carefully. "It was a work matter," Lyra said, but her composed expression had cracked slightly. "Junior diplomatic attachés don't give orders like that," James said. "I spent 3 years in the military. I know what command authority sounds like." Lyra was quiet for a long moment. "No, they don't." "So who are you really?" "Someone who needed to understand humanity beyond diplomatic performances," she said softly. "Someone who has responsibilities that required certainty about your species' character before making critical decisions about our shared future." Before James could press further, Alarms began shrieking throughout the residential complex. Emergency lockdown protocols activated automatically, security barriers slamming into place across windows and doors. "Stay down," Lyra commanded, her entire demeanor transforming. She moved to a wall panel James hadn't known existed, pressing her hand against it. The panel opened, revealing military-grade communication equipment. "This is Solen. Code Vermilion. I need immediate Royal Guard response to Residential Unit 773. Threat level maximum. Royal Guard." The words hung in the air like a detonation. James stared at his wife, this woman he'd been living with for 2 months, who just called for the most elite security force in the Zalari Empire using protocols reserved for only one person. "Lyra," he said slowly, "what aren't you telling me?" She turned to face him, and for the first time since they'd met, he saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not fear for herself, but fear of what she was about to reveal. "My full name is Lyra Solen Vast Zalari," she said quietly. "I'm not a junior diplomatic attaché. I'm the Empress of the Zalari Empire and Supreme Commander of the Galactic Coalition. The woman you married 2 months ago is the most powerful being in known space." The apartment shook as something impacted the outer security barriers. Through the reinforced windows, James could see armored figures engaging with station security forces. "And right now," Lyra continued, "someone is trying very hard to kill us both." The Queen revealed. The world narrowed to pure survival instinct. James dropped into combat medic mode, the training that had kept him alive through 3 years of war taking over without conscious thought. He moved away from the windows, assessing cover positions, calculating angles of fire, looking for improvised defensive options. "How many attackers?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos. Lyra's eyes widened slightly, clearly not expecting such calm pragmatism. "Unknown. At least a strike team of 6, possibly more. They breached station security using classified access codes." Another impact shook the apartment. The security barriers were holding, but James could hear the distinctive whine of cutting equipment. Someone was trying to breach through the reinforced door. "Your guards, how long until they arrive?" James pulled Lyra away from the exposed wall, positioning them both behind the kitchen counter, the most fortified position in the open floor plan. 3 minutes, maybe less. They were stationed 2 sectors away to maintain the cover identity. Lyra's hands were shaking, but her voice remained controlled. "James, I need to explain. Explanations later. Right now I need to know what resources we have." James scanned the apartment with new eyes, looking for anything useful. "That wall panel, what else is hidden in this place?" "Emergency weapons cache, medical supplies, communication relays." Lyra moved to another seemingly ordinary wall section, pressing a sequence that revealed a compartment containing 2 plasma sidearms and what looked like personal shield generators. "The apartment was designed with security contingencies, but I never expected." The door exploded inward with a blast that sent debris flying across the room. James grabbed Lyra and pulled her down as superheated metal fragments peppered the area where they'd been standing. Through the smoke and dust, figures in tactical armor advanced, weapons raised. "Empress Lyra Solen," a distorted voice called through a helmet speaker. "You have betrayed the purity of our empire by bonding with a human. The Council of Ascendancy demands your abdication and the annulment of this abomination." James felt Lyra tense beside him. "The Council of Ascendancy is a radical extremist group," she whispered urgently. "They oppose the peace treaty from the beginning. They want to restart the war. Target the human first," another attacker commanded. "Show the Empress the cost of her choices." James had been in enough combat situations to know when talking was finished. He grabbed one of the plasma sidearms, checking the charge with practiced efficiency. The weapon was Zalari design, but the principles were universal enough. Point at target, pull trigger, hope the other person goes down first. "I need you to trust me," he said to Lyra, meeting her eyes. "When I move, you activate those shield generators and get behind them. Understand?" "James, you're not trained for 3 years as a combat medic means I spent 3 years in active war zones. I know how to stay alive when people are shooting." He adjusted his grip on the weapon. "Trust me." He moved before she could argue, rolling out from behind the counter and firing at the nearest attacker. The plasma bolt caught the figure in the shoulder, spinning them around. Not a kill shot, but enough to disrupt their formation. Lyra activated both shield generators, creating overlapping defensive barriers. The attacker's return fire splashed harmlessly against the shimmering energy fields. "She has shield protection," one attacker called. "Concentrate fire on the human. Drive them apart." But James was already moving again, using furniture and structural pillars for cover, making himself a difficult target while drawing fire away from Lyra. His military training had taught him that in urban combat, mobility was survival. Stay still and you died. Keep moving and you gave yourself chances. He fired again, hitting another attacker in the leg. The plasma weapon had a different recoil pattern than human firearms, but he adjusted quickly. These attackers wore armor, but it wasn't invincible. Joints, seams, gaps in protection. Every armor system had vulnerabilities. James, fall back. Lyra called out. The guards are almost here. An attacker rushed his position. James dropped the plasma weapon and grabbed a piece of broken door frame, using it to deflect a blade strike. Close quarters combat, muscle memory from hand-to-hand training. He twisted inside the attacker's guard, using leverage rather than strength to throw the larger Zalari off balance, then retrieved his weapon and fired point-blank into the exposed back plating. The attacker went down. James's hands were shaking now, adrenaline and remembered terror mixing together. He'd thought he was done with this. Done with fighting, done with life-or-death moments, done with the sick feeling in his stomach that came from hurting another living being even in self-defense. Then the apartment filled with new figures, moving with precision that made the attackers look clumsy by comparison. Royal Guards, their armor carrying insignia James now recognized as the personal protection detail of the Empress herself. They engaged the remaining attackers with overwhelming efficiency, and within seconds the fight was over. One of the guards approached Lyra, dropping to one knee in a gesture of absolute deference. Your Majesty, are you harmed? I'm uninjured, Commander Thane, Lyra said, her voice carrying authority James had never heard from her before. Thanks to my husband's intervention. Every guard in the room turned to look at James. He was still holding the plasma weapon, still breathing hard, still trying to process what had just happened. Your husband? Commander Thane's helmet turned toward James with an intensity that felt like being examined under a microscope. The human from the integration program is your husband? James Rivera is my legally bonded partner, yes, Lyra said firmly. And he just saved my life. The apartment was suddenly very crowded. More guards arrived, along with medical personnel who insisted on examining both James and Lyra despite their protests. Station security forces secured the area, removing the bodies of the attackers. High-ranking officials materialized from nowhere, all of them treating Lyra with a level of deference that made James's head spin. Through it all, he kept catching glimpses of his wife, who was apparently the Empress of an interstellar empire, moving through the chaos with absolute command authority. She gave orders that were immediately obeyed. She made decisions that affected thousands of people with casual ease. She was terrifying and magnificent, and James realized he'd been living with a stranger. Finally, they were alone in a secure conference room, guards posted outside, the immediate crisis contained. I need you to explain, James said quietly. Everything. Lyra sat across from him, and for the first time since the attack, she looked vulnerable. Where should I begin? How about with why the Empress of the Zalari Empire would pose as a junior diplomat and marry a random human through an integration program? You weren't random, Lyra said. I reviewed hundreds of files before selecting you. Combat medic, distinguished service record, multiple commendations for saving lives under fire. But more importantly, psychological profiles that suggested someone who valued duty and compassion over personal advancement. James shook his head, trying to make sense of this. You were testing me? I was testing all of humanity, Lyra corrected. The war ended, but questions remained. Could humans truly be trusted as equal partners in the Galactic Coalition? Or would they ultimately seek dominance, exploit vulnerabilities, prove themselves just another aggressive species requiring containment? She stood, pacing with agitation that seemed very unlike the composed diplomat he'd known. Every negotiation, every treaty session, every formal interaction was performance. Humans said the right things, made the right gestures, but words are easy. I needed to see what humans actually do when they think no one important is watching. So you created a fake identity and married me as some kind of character test, James said, anger finally breaking through his shock. You lied to me for 2 months. Yes, Lyra said simply. I lied about who I was. I deceived you deliberately and systematically. It was necessary, and I won't apologize for the deception itself, but I am profoundly sorry for the position it's placed you in. James stood, needing to move to channel the conflicting emotions surging through him. What exactly did this test prove? That you accepted a diplomatic marriage to someone you believed had no power, no influence, nothing to offer you beyond the arrangement itself, Lyra said. You didn't negotiate for better terms. You didn't demand advantages. You simply agreed because you were told it would help secure peace. She moved closer, her dark eyes fixed on him with unsettling intensity. And when we lived together, you treated me with respect and kindness despite having no political or personal incentive to do so. You were patient when I was distant. You were curious about my culture without being invasive. You made effort to build genuine friendship even though the arrangement required nothing beyond professional courtesy. That's just basic decency, James said. Exactly, Lyra replied. That's precisely what I needed to verify. That humans are capable of basic decency even when there's no advantage to be gained. That you can be trusted with responsibility because you don't automatically seek to exploit it. James sank back into his chair, exhausted. And now what? Everyone knows the Empress married a human. What happens to me? That depends on you, Lyra said softly. I can arrange an annulment. You would receive substantial compensation, protection, safe return to Earth with enough resources to live comfortably. You'd never have to see me again, and I would accept full responsibility for using you in political theater without your informed consent. She paused, and James saw genuine uncertainty in her expression. Or you could stay. Accept your legal position as imperial consort, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Stand beside me as we navigate the political chaos this revelation will create. Help me prove to the galaxy that humans and Zalari can build something meaningful together. Imperial consort, James repeated. What does that actually mean? It means you would be my equal partner in the eyes of coalition law. You would have advisory authority on matters of governance. Diplomatic standing equivalent to heads of state. Formal voice in decisions affecting trillions of beings across hundreds of worlds. Lyra's expression was earnest now, all diplomatic masks stripped away. It means responsibility on a scale that would crush most people. Constant scrutiny, endless demands, danger from those who oppose what we represent. That sounds absolutely terrible, James said honestly. It is terrible, Lyra agreed. It's also the most important role anyone could possibly fill right now. Humanity's position in the Galactic Coalition hangs in the balance. There are factions pushing for restrictions on human expansion, limitations on human authority, containment policies disguised as protective measures. She sat beside him, close enough that he could see the subtle bioluminescent patterns in her skin that marked emotional states in her species. But if the Empress of the Zalari Empire stands before the galaxy and says, I chose this human as my partner, I trust him with my life and my throne, it changes everything. It makes humanity's integration into the coalition not just possible but inevitable. James was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the past 2 months. The comfortable distance he and Lyra had maintained, the boring routines and polite conversations. The woman he'd thought was a junior diplomat who somehow always seemed to know more than she should. The surprising friendship that had been developing despite the artificial nature of their arrangement. Did any of it mean anything? He asked. The conversations we had, the meals we shared, the times you actually seemed to enjoy my company. Was that all just part of the test? Lyra's expression softened in a way he'd never seen before. At first, yes. I was observing you, evaluating your character, maintaining professional distance while assessing whether you could be trusted. But somewhere around week 3 something changed. What changed? You told me about the soldier you couldn't save, Lyra said quietly. The one who died holding your hand, asking you to tell his family he was brave at the end. You cried while telling me that story, and I realized you weren't performing for my benefit. You were sharing something real because you trusted me enough to be vulnerable. She reached out tentatively, and James didn't pull away when she took his hand. Her skin was cool and smooth, the texture different from human but not unpleasant. That's when I stopped seeing you as a test subject and started seeing you as someone I genuinely wanted to know, Lyra continued. Someone whose company I enjoyed not because of what you represented politically, but because of who you are. Someone who makes me laugh at breakfast. Someone who argues with me about literature and philosophy without being intimidated. Someone who sees past the titles and positions to the person beneath. James looked down at their joined hands, human and Zalari, 2 species that had spent 3 years trying to kill each other. I'm scared, he admitted. Not of you but of what staying would mean. The responsibility, the scrutiny, the constant pressure. I became a medic because I wanted to help people one at a time. This is helping people on a galactic scale and I don't know if I'm equipped for that. You're not, Lyra said bluntly. Neither was I when I inherited the throne at age 19. No one is equipped for this level of responsibility. We learn it, grow into it, survive it because we have support and because the alternative is worse. What's the alternative? Chaos. Political instability. Factions within both our governments using this revelation to push for policies that benefit their interests rather than genuine peace. And eventually, inevitably, another war. Lyra's grip on his hand tightened. I won't lie to you, James. Staying means difficulty and danger and enormous pressure. But it also means we might actually build something lasting. Real integration, genuine cooperation, a future where human and Zalari children grow up not knowing we ever fought at all. James thought about the soldiers he'd treated during the war. Young people torn apart by weapons designed for maximum lethality. Humans and Zalari both, suffering the same way, dying the same way, all because political leaders couldn't figure out how to coexist. He thought about the attackers who just tried to kill them both, extremists who wanted to restart that nightmare. He thought about Lyra, who'd risked everything on an unconventional test because she needed certainty before betting trillions of lives on peace. I need conditions, he said finally. Name them. No more deception. If we do this, we do it as genuine partners. You don't hide things from me for my own good or for political convenience. We trust each other or this doesn't work. Agreed, Lyra said without hesitation. I'm not decoration. I'm not just going to stand beside your throne looking supportive. If I'm Imperial Consort, I'm actually contributing. Using my skills, my perspective, my experience to make things better. I would expect nothing less. And we figure out what this relationship actually is, James said, meeting her eyes. Because I don't know if this is friendship or something more, but I need to know we're both clear about what we're building together. Lyra was quiet for a moment, her expression showing the same uncertainty he felt. I don't know either, she admitted. I've never had a genuine relationship that wasn't shaped by my position as Empress. But I'd like to find out. With you. If you're willing. James took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settling over him. This was insane. This was terrifying. This was quite possibly the stupidest thing he'd ever agreed to. All right, he said. I'm staying. Relief flooded Lyra's features, followed immediately by something that might have been joy. Thank you. Truly. I know what this costs you. So what happens now? Now we face the chaos together. Lyra stood, pulling him up with her. The Galactic Council convenes in 6 hours for an emergency session. Every major power in the coalition will be there. We need to address them jointly, present a unified front, prove that this partnership is genuine and beneficial for all our peoples. 6 hours, James repeated. That's not much time to prepare. You're a combat medic who just fought off trained assassins with no preparation at all, Lyra said with a slight smile. I think you can handle a political speech with 6 hours' notice. They spent those hours with Lyra's advisors, who ranged from cautiously supportive to openly horrified. James was briefed on galactic political dynamics, coached on diplomatic protocols, taught the proper forms of address for the dozens of species representatives who would be present. Commander Thane approached him during a break. You fought well for someone with no combat training. I had combat training, James corrected. Just not the kind that prepares you for being ambushed in your own home. You kept the Empress alive. That earns my respect. The guard commander studied him with keen interest. But respect isn't trust. I need to know you understand what you're accepting. Threats against the Empress are constant. By standing beside her, you make yourself a target. Can you handle that? James thought about the war, the constant threat, the knowledge that any moment could be your last. I spent 3 years learning to handle it. I can handle it again if the cause is worth it. Is this cause worth it? James looked across the room at Lyra, who was arguing passionately with an advisor about the wording of the speech they'd deliver. Yeah, I think it is. The Grand Council chamber was enormous, a space designed to accommodate representatives from 300 species. James walked beside Lyra through corridors lined with historical artwork depicting moments of coalition triumph and tragedy. She wore formal imperial regalia now, elaborate robes that marked her status unmistakably. James wore a modified diplomatic uniform that blended human and Zalari design elements, marking him as something new, something unprecedented. Are you ready? Lyra asked as they approached the chamber entrance. Absolutely not, James said. But let's do this anyway. The chamber fell silent as they entered. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy turned to watch them, some curious, some hostile, some calculating the political implications at light speed. Lyra moved to the central podium with James beside her, exactly as they'd planned. Her voice carried through the chamber with absolute authority. Members of the Galactic Coalition, I stand before you today to address recent events and their implications for our shared future. 2 months ago, I entered into a marriage bond with James Rivera, a human combat medic, through the Interspecies Integration Program. This morning, you learned that I did so while concealing my identity as Empress of the Zalari Empire. Murmurs rippled through the assembled representatives. Lyra raised a hand for silence. I did this because the future of this coalition required certainty about humanity's character that no diplomatic negotiation could provide. Words are easy. Treaties are signed by beings with political motivations. I needed to see what humans actually do when they believe no one important is watching. She gestured to James. James Rivera accepted a marriage bond to someone he believed was a low-ranking diplomat with nothing to offer beyond the arrangement itself. He did so because he was told it would help secure peace. In the 2 months we lived together, he treated me with respect, kindness, and genuine friendship despite having no political incentive to do so. When assassins attacked us this morning, he defended me without hesitation, risking his life for mine. Lyra's voice strengthened. This is what humanity offers the coalition. Not just words and treaties, but genuine commitment to cooperation. Not just political calculations but real partnerships built on trust and mutual respect. James Rivera proved that humans can be trusted with responsibility because they accept it without automatically seeking exploitation. She turned to face James directly. And in return, I offer humanity full integration into coalition leadership. James Rivera is now formally recognized as Imperial Consort, with all rights and authorities that position entails. His voice in governance carries equal weight to my own. His perspective and experience inform our decisions at the highest level. The chamber erupted in reactions ranging from support to outrage. James stood quietly, letting Lyra handle the political maneuvering she was expert in. But when she gestured for him to speak, he stepped forward. "I'm not a diplomat," James said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm a medic who spent 3 years treating wounded soldiers from both sides of a war that should never have happened. I learned that we bleed the same way, hurt the same way, die the same way. Our differences are real, but they're not as important as what we share." He looked out at the assembled representatives. "The Empress took a risk by testing humanity this way. I'm taking a risk by standing here. We're both betting everything that cooperation is possible, that peace can last, that we can build something better together than we ever could apart. I can't promise I won't make mistakes. But I can promise I'll always work toward genuine partnership over political advantage." Lyra took his hand, the gesture visible to everyone in the chamber. "This partnership represents a new era for the Galactic Coalition. Not humans subordinate to other species, not Zalari maintaining dominance, but genuine equality and cooperation. The future we're building together." The vote that followed was contentious but ultimately decisive. The coalition formally recognized the marriage and James's position as Imperial Consort. Humanity's status in the coalition was elevated to full partnership. And most importantly, the extremist factions that had hoped to use this revelation to restart conflict found themselves politically isolated. When they finally left the chamber hours later, James felt exhausted in a completely different way than after combat. "That was harder than the fight this morning," he said. "Politics usually is," Lyra agreed. "But we survived. Together." They returned to new quarters, more secure and far more elaborate than their previous apartment. James looked around at the Imperial residence that was now his home, trying to process how dramatically his life had changed in less than 24 hours. "Lyra," he said quietly, "I meant what I said in there. About figuring out what this relationship is. But I need you to know I'm not ready for anything beyond friendship right now. Maybe eventually, but not yet." "I understand," Lyra said. "I'm not ready either. What happened today, the attack, the revelation, it's overwhelming for both of us. We have time to figure this out properly. Time and apparently the scrutiny of the entire galaxy watching our every move." "There is that," Lyra admitted with a slight smile. "But at least we'll figure it out together." James moved to the window, looking out at the stars beyond Gateway Station. Somewhere out there, humanity's future was being shaped by the decisions they'd made today. It was terrifying and humbling and absolutely insane. But when Lyra joined him at the window, her presence beside him felt right in a way that transcended politics and duty. They'd both taken enormous risks. They'd both chosen partnership over easier alternatives. And together they were going to help build a future where a human combat medic and a Zalari Empress standing side by side was the beginning of something extraordinary rather than the end of everything. "Thank you for staying," Lyra said softly. "Thank you for trusting me enough to tell the truth," James replied. They stood together at the window, two beings from worlds that had been enemies, now bound together by choice and circumstance, facing an uncertain future with determination and fragile hope. The galaxy would watch them, judge them, test them. But they would face it together as partners, as friends, and perhaps someday as something more. The war was over. The real work of building peace had just begun. And James Rivera, former combat medic turned Imperial consort, was finally ready to stop running from his past and start building a future worth fighting for.